What up, guys? Thank you for joining us once again for our leadership teaching. This is part number 4. In our first 3 episodes, we talked about humility, love, and then accountability, and learning how to lead like Jesus in each and every one of those. And today, we are going to be doing part number 4, which is going to be learning to lead like Jesus with relationships. And so we're going to be doing this every single Wednesday. We're going to be posting on our YouTube channel, on our Instagram, and on our Facebook this video. A leadership teaching every single Wednesday until we make it through this book, and then we're going to continue to move on after that in our leadership teachings. But today we're going to be talking about relationships. We're going to be talking about how did Jesus build relationships in his leadership, and we're going to be going through this chapter right here. It says in Proverbs 13:20, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." It's a Swedish proverb that says, "Shared joy is a double joy. Shared sorrow is half a sorrow." And so we see that Jesus was a relational person. It's all about relationships. Everything boils down to relationships. Every little bit of leadership has to do with some way, shape, or form of building relationships, making relationships, falling back on old relationships. Everything that you do has something to do with a relationship. So in Matthew 9:10-11, the Pharisees saw and they asked their disciples, Jesus' disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Why does he do that? It's because Jesus was a relational person. He loved people, especially people who claimed even no religious background or devotion. He loved simply being around people. He didn't care what their ethnicity was. He didn't care how bad they were or how bad the world at that time said that they were. Jesus simply loved people. He loved building relationships with them, and he loved to talk to him. And so we find our example of being or building relationships through Jesus. It says this right here: "Rich relationships with God and people are the truest riches to be enjoyed." And so we must value that. Relational leaders value relationships sometimes more than even the measured results. And so sometimes we have to focus on the relationships, even if it tweaks or messes up the results at the end of the day. But because you were building relationships, because you were strengthening those relationships, the results at that time didn't really matter. Obviously, you still want great results, but when you're building relationships, it may tweak. And you would rather have a great relationship than an incredible outcome of a result. We value those as leaders. We value the relationships at the end of the day. And so the quality of our lives is influenced by the quality of our relationships. That is so important. The quality of our lives is influenced by the quality of our relationships. We read again in 1 Corinthians 4:16-17. This is Paul talking. He says, "Therefore I urge you to imitate me. For this reason I have sent to you Timothy, my son, whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord. He will remind you of my way of life in Jesus Christ, which agrees with what I teach everywhere in every church." And so our relational investment is our greatest asset. So as a leader, relationships are one of the greatest assets that you have access to. The relationships that you build each and every day as a leader, you can fall back on those things. I feel, even when I was in high school or in elementary school, the relationships that I have built, there are relationships that I could call on right now. I could pick up the phone, send a text or call, and they would be here whenever I needed them to. Why? Because I have relationships with them. And that's what Paul is talking about. He has built a relationship with Timothy, and hey, I'm sending him to you. I trust him. I have a relationship with him, and he is going to help me in whatever I need. And I want you guys to trust him as well. And so that's what Paul is talking about here. It says in 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Do not be misled. Bad company corrupts good character." And so we as leaders must understand how relationships affect our quality of life, the people that we hang out with, the people that we do life with each and every day. And so we have to understand that. People are lonely today because they're building walls instead of bridges. We have to realize that those relationships affect you. Those relationships affect your life each and every day. The relationships that you build, it affects the quality of your life. But if you are building bridges or building walls instead of bridges, now that affects you. You don't have assets. You don't have relationships that you have access to. Why? Because as a leader, you've been building walls instead of bridges to people. And we must understand that. To have meaningful relationships requires a prayerful process of investing your time. To have good relationships, to have quality relationships, it takes time, it takes prayer, it takes effort to pour into those relationships and everything that you're trying to do. Anthony D'Angelo states, treasure your relationships, not your possessions. Relationships will give you a greater return. And that is, without a shadow of a doubt, the truth. You will always gain by having good and great and strong relationships. Your relational leaders value the eternal significance of relationships. And continue to move on. Relationships, or a relational investment plan. What is your plan to create relationships? How do you create relationships? Even if we look back at our homes, your home life, your house, your family, our homes can be incubators for relational development. An open home opens hearts to Jesus. Having an open home, having an open heart, then allows the relationships to be built even greater. If you open up even if you have great relationships at home, continue to do that. 1 Thessalonians 2:8, we cared for you because we loved you so much. We were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. And so when you open up your home to people, when you open up yourself, when you open up, everything that you have access, when you serve people with open hands and with vulnerability, you are then able to build a bridge to them and build the relationship. That's why I bring up, using your home as an incubator for relationships. That could be more of a generic term of using everything that you own, using everything you have access to build those relationships and to build bridges to people, to show the love of God, to be able to preach the gospel, to be able to affect lives in a positive manner, and simply to be vulnerable with people. And when you are vulnerable with people, people are more likely to open up and to speak life. And that is when you begin to build relationships. Relational leaders invest their lives in other people's lives, and that is plain and simple. Relational leaders prayerfully and wisely approach friendship at work. Too familiar friendships can lead to unhealthy influence. So maybe you're too familiar with somebody. Let me say it like this. Or in Hebrews 12:5-6, my son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. Okay? Doesn't mean that God doesn't like you, doesn't love you. Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises everyone he accepts as his son. And so because you have a relationship with God, because you love him, and because he loves you, he will discipline you. He will discipline. Why? Because he cares about you. Because you have a relationship with God. And so, constantly ask what's best for the team instead of what does your friend want. And so sometimes as leaders, we can get too close sometimes to relationships when in the moment you don't need to be, in the moment the decision that needs to be made not from a friend standpoint, but as a leader standpoint, as what is best for the team, not what is best for that specific friend that you have. What is best for the team? And you do it in love. God does it in love. He does the, he does the discipline in love, so that because you will grow, you will be better for the discipline that he has put upon you, that he has rebuked you, as Hebrews says. And we must accept that so that we can grow as leaders, so that we can grow as followers of Jesus. Even looking at the disciples, I'm just going to read this little section right here talking about, Barnabas, John, and Mark, and Paul. And so likewise, lastly, wise leaders make hard decisions, even when it adversely affects a friend. This protects the integrity of the organization. So Paul felt this tension when he decided that his friend John Mark was not mature enough for the responsibility of a missions trip. And so Barnabas wanted to take John, also Mark, with them, but Paul did not think it was wise to take him because he had deserted him in Philadelphia and had not continued with them in the work. And that was in Acts 15:37 through 38. And so balancing leaders and friendship is not always the easiest thing, but you have to be able to balance leadership and friendship. And so just because you have relationships with people does not mean that as a leader you make decisions based off of the friendship that you have with that relationship, because sometimes that can affect you in a negative way. And so make decisions, and you have to balance that with leadership and friendship. You have to balance it. You have to learn how to do that. Relational leaders do what's best for everyone instead of showing favoritism to that relationship that you have. And so kind of, just going over the takeaways, there's 8 takeaways that come out of this chapter, and with this kind of an overview of what we just kind of went over. Number 1, relational leaders value relationships sometimes more than measured results. Number 2, relational leaders understand how relationships affect their quality of life. Number 3, relational leaders value the eternal significance of relationships. Number 4, relational leaders invest their lives in others' lives. Number 5, relational leaders honor their parents even when they are hard to honor, because the Bible talks about honoring your father and mother, and they are still your father and they are still your mother. So you have to honor them, respect that. Number 6, relational leaders view marriage as laboratory for living out their faith. So, using a marriage, using relationships, using your home, using everything that you have to invest into a relationship. Relational leaders do what's best for everyone instead of showing favoritism. And so, that is the overview of how to lead like Jesus with relationships. You have to have relationships. Jesus had relationships. He built relationships. He built bridges. He did not build walls. He built bridges. And so that he was able to affect as many people as possible. And that is the goal as a leader. How can we reach as many people as we possibly can? And that is simply learning to lead like Jesus in relationships. So thank you guys for tuning in. And next week we will be doing part 5. And that is going to be learning to lead like Jesus with teachability, learning to be teachable, learning to receive, learning to learn, and wanting to get better. So we thank you guys and hope to see you guys soon.